Hey everybody, to which the correct response is, hey Dr. Nick. Good to see you all. And I'm just going to give it a few minutes here to see who's able to join us today. I hope you're all having a wonderful Saturday afternoon. And for those that are going to join today, I hope it's helpful in your journey. These live streams, for anyone that's just joining us on these, I don't mean this particular one today, but just in general, for anyone that's joining us for these and hasn't been really tracking with some of the ones that have come before, we definitely are trying our best to just think through some of the issues relating to autonomy and healing from religious trauma, recovering our identities, etc. Just hopefully some good things that are going to encourage you in your journey towards a better life, a new life. But today's topic is going to be interesting. It's about how Christianity objectifies people, or at least how it can, I should say. Of course, not all versions of Christianity do, but a lot of them do. And a lot of us have felt that very directly, and so we know exactly what's going on there. Hey, Accident Agnostic, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, twice in one day, that's awesome. And Disillusioned Pony Tricks, hi, Tim from Texas, thank you so much for joining today. Today's topic is going to be interesting. It's about objectifying people, and I think it'll be interesting because I think some of you might be surprised at some of the twists and turns that I take with this a little bit, at least in certain parts. It's not quite what probably everybody's thinking, but in some ways it will be. But again, there'll be some twists that might hopefully stretch people to think through some things. But we're about a minute or two over here, so I'm going to get started. I just want to start with a few definitional things. Objectifying people can mean different things, and we're going to talk about it from a couple different angles today. But I think of it as like treating somebody like an object or a thing instead of a person, where they have their own thoughts, their own feelings, their own intrinsic worth. We know that when someone is objectified, they're often viewed like as a tool or a means to an end. You're kind of disregarding their individuality, their humanity in some ways. Hey, John Wick, good to see you. And, we're often ultimately kind of demeaning them because we're disregarding some aspect of their humanity that's usually kind of shady. It can be kind of gross the way that objectification occurs. And we're going to talk about some of those more obvious ways. We're also going to talk about some ways that are a little bit less obvious. But objectification, I think, is very frequently discussed in the context of sexuality and gender. A lot of times it's focused on women, where they're treated as mere sex objects for men's desires, rather than as human beings, complex human beings. It can certainly occur in job environments. It can occur in racial dynamics, within relationships, where somebody is sort of prioritized or chosen or valued because of specific attributes or functions or roles. The harm, I think, in objectification is that it can dehumanize people. It can really strip away their agency, and it can reduce their identity, their complex identity, into this one-dimensional role. And it can certainly lead to some very bad feelings of people who are realizing it's happening, where they're feeling either exploited, used, worthless. They certainly feel like their respect and dignity has been diminished, and it can certainly perpetuate harmful stereotypes. It can perpetuate power imbalances in our society and in our subcultures. We talk a lot about the stereotypical objectification, things like maybe the fashion industry, where a woman in a bikini is at the center of a car advertisement. Like, why do I have to have a woman in a bikini to advertise a new car? Why can't we just advertise the car itself? Pornography, of course, we talk about that all the time. That can be very highly objectifying. I do take a different approach to the topic of pornography than a lot of my colleagues do. I don't think that pornography has to be a bad thing. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but this is not the time for us to go deep into the topic of pornography. I did have an interesting discussion a while ago with not that was my discussion, but for some reason his name is escaping me. But anyway, let me see if I can find that real quick. It was a great discussion. Daryl Ray, that's it. Daryl Ray from Recovering from Religion. I did an interview with him. I highly recommend it. Further down on my list of not the live streams, but the regular interviews. And he talked about pornography quite a bit. I don't think pornography is always a bad thing. And I think there is something true about ethical pornography being an option for people. But again, we'll talk about that whole ball of wax in another live stream another day. But just saying pornography in general can be highly objectifying. Objectification is really when you're really looking at a person and you're treating them again as a part of a whole. You're not saying they have their own thoughts, their own feelings, their own background, their own agency. And I'm just going to give a couple quick examples of some ways that this happens in general. This is not yet the religious part of it, but and some of these are just more obvious stereotypical things. So we kind of get a foundation to launch into the religious side of it. But catcalling, when somebody sees a beautiful woman walk by and, typically a man is whistling at her or something, they're kind of reducing that woman to her physical body, to her physical appearance. That can occur when you're staring at someone in a way that, makes them uncomfortable. You're clearly kind of judging them positively or negatively for their looks. Certainly we all understand that kind of concept. Making remarks about somebody, especially without their consent, about their body, whether good or bad, and just that general overemphasis on people's appearances. You're complimenting someone on their looks and ignoring what's in their head, what's in their mind, their achievements, their qualities. Certainly some of the more aggressive ones, as you move past that, is things like inappropriate touching. Touching somebody without their consent. You're kind of making them feel like their body is public property, ignoring consent, judging people based on their clothing, treating somebody as a trophy. I think that idea of like a trophy wife is a big deal, where someone's appearance is you're just valuing them for what they look like, even their literal curves, as opposed to who they really are. We think a lot about it as sexualizing in the media. I think a lot about even a lot of Instagram pages. You can go to it and you can just see people are even they are objectifying themselves on purpose to sell their channel. You're reducing people to sometimes literal body parts. You're talking about that person is just a big pair of boobs or something. You're reducing them to that, or you're saying, oh, that's just a big hunk. Like, well, he might be a really muscular football player, but there might be more to him than that. Things like that, reducing people to one part of the whole. Certainly interrupting people, even in talking over them, can be one where you're ignoring their contributions because of their gender or their appearance, as if their thoughts are less valuable. Things like assuming gender roles. Often, people would assume that certain people are less competent in certain leadership roles, and that just, based on stereotypes. Ignoring personal space, sort of similar to ignoring consent issues and inappropriate touching, but just ignoring personal space. You're invading their space without permission. You're making them feel like their comfort is unimportant. And sometimes just the way we judge people based on sexual history, like, oh, that person's a slut or whatever. It's like, it's as if their sexual behavior has defined their entire character or life without any history or understanding of who they are, any sense of their dignity. Using someone for your emotional support person without any regard for their own needs or feelings. The idea of tokenism, like including somebody in a group just to fulfill a diversity requirement. You're not really valuing them. It's just you're trying to tick a box. A lot of things in society where people make assumptions based on people's race and ethnicity, and those stereotypes. We saw a lot of those in The Office with Michael Scott bringing those to light, sometimes in very funny ways in that show, but still it is real that there's a lot of objectification that occurs. Even sometimes simple things that we just let slide, like assuming someone's available. We expect someone to be available to us all the time and at work, or do favors. We don't consider their personal life. Sometimes at work, expecting unpaid work, whether it's housework, caregiving, work at your workplace, because of their gender or their social role. All kinds of stuff. Here's read a few more fast. People can dismiss other people's opinions because of their gender or background, and we can certainly we can certainly see a lot of objectification when people are over sexualizing children. We've all seen and kind of cringed at those little things where they dress a little girl up in a like an adult woman's burlesque dress, and she's got 3 pounds of makeup on her face. It's like, holy smokes, like you're over sexualizing this child. Things like assuming weakness. We can assume somebody's weak or incapable simply because, again, of their appearance or gender or age. We can view them as property, for sure. We'll talk about that shortly. We can value only their physical strength. And I think it's funny, I say this tongue in cheek, but some people would kind of make jokes of so-and-so is only there just to open up the cans, because one person can't open up a can of spaghetti, the other person always can. And it's like a joke, but objectification occurs there. And certainly expecting perfection. We hold people to impossible standards, even in terms of their appearance. And when they're not hitting that standard, it kind of feels like they're not good enough. These are ways that people in general can be reduced to mere objects or stereotypes, and that undermines their humanity and their dignity and their agency. And I think Christians, when we're going to slowly hone in here, we're not going to jump immediately to Christianity. But hey, Nancy, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for your message earlier, and thank you for your comment here. I really appreciate that very much. So good to see you here. I think Christians are going to say in their moral framework that they're the sort of the bastion where they're upholding human dignity and worth. If it weren't for us, just so many bad things would happen. But I think in reality that they are actually very culpable for severely diminishing your individual identity and autonomy. And they often, in the dynamics that we're going to talk about, it can really lead you to a significant loss of your identity and yourself and your self-worth. They're turning you into a means to an end. And we're going to go through that in great detail in a second. But they're making you into an object. They're making you the path to a certain outcome or experience. They're dehumanizing you. They're degrading you. They're sort of dissecting you, chloroforming you, cataloging you. You become a notch on a belt. You become something to be used. You become, this. We want to say, how many people got saved today? Oh, we got 25 hands, 25 people in the kingdom today. You became part of a transaction, and you cease become a whole person. You became part of a list. You became an object. I do want to make, whoops, I disappeared for a second. Hopefully I didn't disappear for long for y'all. I do want to make a few clarifications, and this is where I say I think that there's some of you might be thrown for a loop by some of what I'm about to say here, but I think it's important to say it, and then we're going to get back to the main point. Clarifications I wanted to add. I think we all do objectify people. And I think we almost can't help but do it. And we're going to talk through some of that, but I think that there's ways in which it's woven into the way that we interact with the world. And I think to say objectification, just that we can somehow be completely clear of it, is false. It happens in little ways. I think it can happen in a millisecond, where let's say you're driving your car, and let's say that the car next to you in a few seconds is about to cut you off. They don't mean to, perhaps, but they do cut you off. And you don't realize until later that that's actually your best friend in the car. But until maybe they have a very generic car and you don't recognize it at first. And this stranger cuts you off. For that moment, you're objectifying them. They're just an object that cuts you off. They're just another race car driver in the race to get to the next red light. But the minute that you realize, oh, that's my best friend, all of a sudden you cease to objectify them, right? It pulls back very quickly. We all do it all the time. When somebody upsets us, we call customer service. The person doesn't speak English very well. We sort of reduce it to some kind of stereotype, and we're ready to write them off in some ways. We all do it. And we need to be aware of what we're doing to people that really does, in my mind, put them down. I also think it's important to say that objectification is not transcendently wrong. And I want to say again, objectification of someone else is not transcendently wrong. There's no transcendent right or wrong about anything. The issue is not whether objectification is bad or a sin. There is no such thing as sin, in my opinion. We're here talking about what makes people thrive, what respects them as a whole person, what treats them with decency and continues to give them agency and wholeness and the nuance of the human journey. But I would argue that the vast majority of animal history, of which we're a part, we're just evolved animals, we're evolved primates. the vast majority of animal history has included and even necessitated objectifying everything around us. It's sort of a new idea in town in terms of the whole history of the planet, that objectification is suddenly a bad thing. But it's part of how our consciousness has evolved. We have done it forever. Everything around us is by and large been an object for billions of years. And suddenly, in the last couple 100,000 years perhaps, it's become a problem. And I think it's a serious problem we need to think through. But I think we need to, in this conversation, not necessarily say everything that we're going to say is transcendently wrong, both because there's no transcendence and there's no such thing as sin. But I also want to make sure that these kind of conversations where we're kind of judging some things do not become about us becoming the thought police. We escaped that in Christianity, and we don't want to return to it. I don't want to get arrogant and act like we never objectify people just because we've deconverted. I also want to make sure I'm not here to say that every instance of objectification is inappropriate or even unnatural or unhealthy. I think some of it can be completely natural and completely normal. We're just here to acknowledge it and be able to make better decisions as we hopefully see it in action, and make the best choice to say, am I culpable in any way for reducing someone else to a means to an end? And is that really the best choice for myself and for them? Am I being the best person I can be in doing this? Am I healthy? And also, is there a facade going on where they think I'm actually interested in them or caring about them, and actually all I'm doing is using them? And most people, when they realize they're being used, they feel very slighted. They want to escape. They feel like they've been in a prison. And that's how we're going to kind of frame this as we get to Christianity in a few minutes. I think sexual objectification especially is often seen as horrific, but I do think there is a balance. I don't think there's anything wrong with enjoying the purely physical passions and eroticism. We're so used to words like that's so carnal, that's so fleshly. We don't want to get into a dualism. There's nothing wrong with just wanting to get laid. There's nothing wrong with wanting to masturbate. There's nothing wrong when a couple is trying to conceive and the wife is sort of using her husband as a sperm donor and having sex 3 times a day when she's most fertile. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with a couple waking up in the middle of the night and saying, one of the person saying to the other person, I'm really horny. The other person is saying, of course, let's do it. Let's do it. Great. Well, for that moment, you're not necessarily in the deepest, passionate, affectionate, full moment of the best moment of your marriage. You are probably just looking at the pure carnality, to use that word, the pure eroticism. If you just want to, come together quickly and you're done, and you're kind of objectifying somebody, but that's not wrong. You're allowed to do that. That's fine. Anytime you all who are, in a marriage or a committed relationship and you decide to enjoy fantasies, sexual fantasies, you are absolutely objectifying that person, both the person you're with and the person in your mind. I don't think that again has to be a problem. People are allowed to use fantasies and enjoy it to the nth degree. Objectification is not always wrong. I also want to sort of wrap up this part about the whole things that I think some of you are going to be surprised that I'm saying. But the irony is that I think some people want to be objectified. I find that very fascinating. Of course, I mentioned trophy wives before. Consensual sex workers certainly want to be objectified. There's even, I remember experiences growing up where there were Christians who were seen as trophy Christians. Maybe a pastor's daughter, the pastor of a huge church, and he's seen as like, maybe he's written 20 books and he's on TV or something. And he's a big deal. And he has this daughter that's coming of age and she's absolutely drop dead gorgeous. And she knows her Bible front to back. She's been groomed excessively to be a pastor's wife or a missionary's wife. And she's a trophy Christian girl in that context. And all the guys know it. There's guys like that too. I remember going to, when Joshua Harris was a Christian and I was a teenager, I remember his I Kiss Dating Goodbye book, and he was on a big tour. I remember seeing him, and I'll tell you that the girls were swooning over single and available Joshua Harris. He was absolutely objectified as a trophy Christian husband, potentially. I think it's also ironic that Yahweh was at one point literally an object, sort of reverse objectification, but he was literally a carved, shaped object that now sits in a museum. You can see the L, the actual statue, and some of you have seen that. I'm talking about. Let me see if I can find the Yahweh figurine. Where was that? I was trying to remember where that's listed. The Canaanite god El from Megiddo. A lot of you have seen that. Derek Lambert's had it on some of his thumbnails. But that gold statue of a man sitting with a little mirror or something on his in his hand. He was an object, and he went from being objectified to being kind of vagified or whatever you call it. But he was anthropomorphic, and he became unanthropomorphic. But we have objectification going both directions here. And again, it's not always wrong, but I think we need to understand the dynamics and how we are either manipulating people and or being manipulated. So again, going back to the main part of this, when people are objectified, their humanity can get stripped away, sometimes in very significant ways. And again, gender, race, specific roles, specific beliefs even. You're reducing people. You're trying to take a reductionist view and pull them down to this specific thing that they can fit into this narrow slot, and that works. And you're sort of disregarding their complexity and often their dignity, and that can really do some damage if you're not careful. If you're not careful, meaning in terms of understanding that it's happening to you, it can have an extremely dehumanizing effect, I think. And you're more than just something to be used or something. You're not a trophy. You have experiences, you have emotions, you have a background, you have memories, you have needs that in these contexts can be ignored and dismissed. You can certainly feel alien, you can feel unseen and undervalued, and it can be an easy way to mistreat people. It becomes very easy to rationalize harming people or neglecting them when their full humanity is not fully acknowledged. They're not a complete and valuable human being. They're just something to get something accomplished. We often talk about how this can perpetuate inequality and oppression. Certain groups get objectified on the basis of gender to face discrimination and exclusion. And we've made a lot of strides in our society in some ways, but there's still some significant ways that we haven't. And that's pretty it's pretty concerning. It's pretty sad. People are being objectified, and they're also being marginalized. Their lower status is sort of being entrenched. It's a power dynamic. I'm in charge, you're not. I'm making the decision for you. You're passive, and you just have to take it. And we need to learn to be advocating for our rights and our dignity, and for other people's rights and dignity. But I do want to, again, I'm moving this from large, just zooming into Christianity. The idea that I want to get to here is that Christianity, especially certain interpretations more than others, can really objectify people in a way that is very stealthy. We've talked about that a lot this week. A lot of these things are very stealthy. They're very manipulative. And even though they might claim to uphold human dignity, they really do reduce people to mere aspects of a theological narrative and a Christian social narrative. And we're not really recognizing their full humanity. And in some cases, these dynamics are very painful and damaging. So one of the first ones I want to talk about is original sin. Of course, one of the central tenets of Christianity is this concept. We're saying humans are born sinful because of the disobedience of our first parents, Adam and Eve. And it's categorizing people as fundamentally flawed and corrupted from birth. And so you're leading yourself through this doctrine to view individuals as inherently unworthy and in need of salvation and redemption from God, from this external source. And you're effectively diminishing the value of human life because you're defining individuals primarily by one little aspect, by their sinful nature. You're not looking at their inherent worth. You're not looking at their potential for good. And of course, Christianity is going to come in, especially with the New Testament theology, and say, correct, you don't have potential for good. You don't have worth apart from God. And it's very, very sick, in my opinion, the way they do that. And in some certain subcultures of Christianity and Christian teaching, like the Calvinist traditions, the idea of total depravity is going to suggest to you that humans are completely incapable of doing anything good apart from divine intervention and divine choice. And that leads people to feel like they're just passive objects. You're literally you're sort of in this, sitting somewhere in this soup of eternity, and God looks down from outside of eternity and says, I'll pick that one, and I'll pick that one. You're an object in his chess game. God even talks about in Romans 9, he says, I have the right as the potter to take you, the clay, and make some of you into objects of mercy and some of you into objects deserving wrath. He's literally using that kind of phraseology. Your moral autonomy, your decision-making, your human worth, it's all kicked out the door. Your personal agency, your self-esteem, it's all kicked out the door, all of it. It's pretty crazy. And when you look at that and say, I inherited my sin nature from Adam and Eve, you're painting a very, very somber picture of humanity and of each individual. You're flawed from the very start. And you're going to have people dealing, of course, with feelings of guilt and unworthiness, which we all talk about, but it's reducing you to inherited flaws. Again, this is all, it's reducing you to something, reductionist stuff. We're reducing you to your inherited flaws, and you're not seen as a unique individual that's valued with your own strengths and background and potential and amazing ways of seeing the world. You're just a body that's inherited this sin nature. You know, when you do that to people, and you really push them towards this dependency on some kind of external validation and salvation and redemption, instead of saying, you as a human going through normal human experiences can just have this beautiful moral development over time as you think through issues and you blossom. There's no blossoming. You're just inheriting a sin nature, and that's all you are. You've been reduced. Of course, connected to that heavily is the eternal judgment or damnation, hellfire preaching. It divides individuals into you're saved or you're damned. You're saved or you're lost based on your acceptance of Jesus. And that's a huge objectification of people. And you're disregarding the complexity of individual lives and why I believe or I don't believe, or I believe this part but not that part. You're reducing this beautiful sum total of all of someone's existence and life into one simple question. You either believe or you don't. We're reducing you. It's a very binary perspective. And your diverse human experiences and the moral complexities of these issues, it doesn't matter. We're just going to come down to one judgmental attitude. It's a simple yes or no. Do you believe or don't you? Are you in or you out? You're in the club or you're not in the club. And it's amazing. There's such a strong focus in our churches on salvation and damnation. I may not use that word. You're saved or you're unsaved. And it's a simplification. It's an oversimplification where you are socially ostracized if you're not in the club. That's what this is about. We're reducing you to a decision. We're reducing you to something very, very simple. When people use that fear as a motivator to say you might go to hell someday, they're going to provoke in you this deep anxiety and this fear, and they're going to ask you to please conform with the party line, please conform with our faith to avoid God's wrath, his retribution. You're number one saying, I want people to believe this even apart from true, genuine personal conviction. It's that idea of like Pascal's wager. If you're not familiar with that, it's the basic concept of, if Christians are right, and we would maybe say, okay, well, assume for the sake of argument you're right, then if we side with them and they're right, and we place our faith in God, then you get heaven. What a wonderful outcome. You weren't really sure that you really believed it, but you just said you believed it for the sake of making sure that you got the good outcome and avoided the bad outcome. So if you were to say, well, if you're an atheist and you're right, what's the best and the worst? Well, the best is that you've redeemed your time and used it not stuck in mythology. But if you are wrong as an atheist, then your outcome is hell. And so you're basically putting these people in this state of fear and anxiety. They're manipulated heavily. They want to avoid that punishment, of course, but they don't necessarily really believe. They just want to avoid, they want that get out of jail free card. And when you reduce people to a yes or a no, did you sign on the dotted line or didn't you? Are you a Christian or not? And that's your worth. That's your whole worth. That's the whole kit and caboodle. Your worth is measured by whether you are saved or unsaved. Your intrinsic qualities, your journey, your background, your memories, your achievements, what you think, your moral development, all of it, it doesn't matter. You are not valued for who you are. You're valued for whether or not you signed up for the club. and your spiritual state becomes paramount. Your human journey, your human experience becomes less important. It's simply, are you in the club or not? And again, related to that, evangelistic stuff. When we grew up in these evangelical churches, we're always trying to win souls. We loved that concept of we're soul winners. Even the Bible, I know it's used out of context, but that verse, the soul that wins, the man that winneth souls is wise. That's what it's all about. We're framing this as we're saving people. And we might say on the surface, well, we're genuinely concerned. We don't want them to burn. We also want them in heaven. We want them to know the beauty of the gospel. Evangelism is just another form of objectification. You're seen as a potential convert. You're seen as someone that we can get in the club and put a notch on our belt. We saved 10 people today. You've been reduced to a decision. You've been reduced to a number. Can we say we saved 10 people today? And if we did 10, we got 10 people saved this month, then let's aim for 12 next month or 15 next month. Let's up the numbers. You're a transaction. You're an opportunity. You've been reduced. And of course, I can speak to that in a very shameful way that I was involved with some missions work. I was involved with New Tribes Mission, now called Ethnos 360. But these groups and Wycliffe, Bible translators, and others like them, they're spreading Christianity with very little respect for the local religions, the local cultures, the local philosophies. It's just staggering, and a lot of it is it's cultural appropriation, it's cultural domination. We want to plant, white churches. We want to plant white churches all over the world, and if the primary goal is conversion, we don't need to necessarily understand too much of their existing traditions. We just need them to be like us, look like us, sing like us. Yes, they can keep their language. We can translate the Bible into their language. But apart from that, we need them to look like us. We should be able to go to a tribe that has never had the gospel. And at some point, we should be able to go sit down in a church that we've planted in the jungle for these people. And though they may sing a different words because of their language, we should hear the tune Amazing Grace. We should, and it warms our hearts as Christians, doesn't it? Oh my goodness, these people are singing in this foreign language, this tribal language. We'll never understand it. It's so complicated. But the tune, I can hear the tune. They're singing Amazing Grace, aren't they? All glory to God. And that's what we're doing. We're objectifying the whole tribes. They have rich, multifaceted lives, a beautiful history. We're certainly not opposed to trying to help tribal people change in terms of getting better health care. And there's a lot of ways in which they're very tribal people can be very, very, very vicious to each other. We want to try to stop that. We want to keep people alive. I've heard horrible stories, such as child pulling. Just people try to kidnap somebody, perhaps a young girl, for a bride from one tribe to the other, and instead of just discussing it, they'll literally four men, 2 from one tribe and 2 from another, will pull. 2 will pull her hands, 2 will pull her feet, and they'll pull her back and forth like tug of war until she's dead. There's some awful things that tribal people, we'd like to help that stuff. But in terms of making them a project to be saved or not saved, I'm sorry, we were doing colonialism. That's all it was. And we're reducing individuals as, again, targets for conversion. We're completely overlooking their humanity. These aggressive missionary tactics that I was, again, very aware of, very much starting to become a part of, we become culturally insensitive. We disrespect them, their history. We just want to get them saved. Of course, another big way that Christianity objectifies people is gender roles. This is a big one, but strict gender roles are telling you have specific life choices that are available to you based on your gender. And, you stay on this path, and maybe there's a few rare exceptions, especially for women, it was always like, you can be a wife, you can be a mother. If you're not going to do that, it has to be for something really a big deal. Like you're going to be a nurse, perhaps you're going to be a single missionary, but to just say, I'm just going to go have a career, you're predefining. No, of course not. You can't just go have a career. You can't just be a businesswoman. We're trying to homogenize everybody. All you women have to do all the same kind of thing. And your personal desires, your interests, your personal development, it's all kind of put on the chopping block. We're restricting you. We're demoralizing you. And, it's interesting, but the gender roles thing is one of the most fascinating things to me, in that if you were to look at it if you could theoretically take a generation where the gender role issue was not that strong, and you imposed it, that first generation might say, this is really weird, this is hard to do. Why can't women do everything men can do? But by the time you get to the second and third generations, those girls have been trained, thoroughly indoctrinated and trained to believe that this is the best life ever. And they will intentionally, they want that life on purpose. And of course, they're free to take it. It's your life. Do with it what you want. But they're going to see it as the only good life. And they're going to see every other woman that doesn't do it as very deceived. You know, the whole thing of like feminism is always bad. It's got nothing good to offer. And the only thing to do is to espouse patriarchy. Again, we're objectifying women, narrowing them down, constraining them to these certain predefined roles, and we're very much limiting their agency. And the idea of their ability to express their thoughts is limited to, you know, how does this fit in the context of your husband being the leader? We've all seen those umbrellas, you know, God, like Christ, the church, husband, wife, kids, and this patriarchal stuff, where men are always in positions of authority over women, where subservience is the word of the day. You know, your duty as a wife is as a wife and a mother. And, you know, that objectification is going to, of course, limit a woman's role. She can't do that much, especially within these religious communities. But, you know, what if a woman wants different opportunities, professional opportunities, social opportunities? We keep shutting it down. We're perpetuating gender inequality. You know, women are, of course, often forbidden from holding any kind of leadership role, like a pastor or a priest. Obviously, those roles don't mean anything to me. They're all versions of, you know, magic and smoke and mirrors. But still, like, if a woman wants to be in them, why are we saying no? Women are mandated in many of these cases to simply focus on their domestic duties. Your duty is to be available to your husband. Your duty is to take care of the home. Your duty is to take care of the kids and take care of the dishes, and submit to yourself. Submit to your husband's leadership and to his, you know, spiritual authority. When we talk about that, we're often emphasizing modesty and purity. And I'm going to get to that in a little bit later, but, you know, we're often objectifying them in terms of your value isn't what you're valuable to the men as a potential mate. That's all it is. It's really sad when you look at this stuff and you think we've had this stuff going on for 2,000 plus years since Christianity began. And of course, I think some of it is not just Christianity. I think some of it is cultural, but Christianity has just kind of cemented it in place. I think some of this stuff would still be with us, unfortunately. But patriarchy through Christianity has certainly helped to keep it very, very much strong and alive. In terms of, again, the sexual purity part of it, you know, we emphasize chastity for people, especially women, and we place all kinds of focus on, is she a virgin? We're not looking at her character. We're not looking at her thoughts and the beauty of what she thinks and her life and all her personal achievements and goals. We're simply saying, has anybody ever had sex with you? And if the answer is yes before marriage, then you should feel ashamed and inadequate, second class, as they say, chewed up gum, spit out. You know, these standards are high. And of course, the people that can fulfill those standards are kind of held up as a great example, even if it might not even be true, but just, you know, people think it's true. So we're going to hold them up as a good example. But you're objectified. You're reduced to one simple question. Has anybody ever had sex with you before marriage? And your worth is judged heavily on whether or not you have conformed to these sexual purity norms. It's really sad. There's some norms that go along with that are kind of different, but just talking again about sexuality, just basic cliches like men are visual, women are not. Men want sex nonstop, women do not. There's all kinds of ways in which we're reducing people to a cliche, reducing people to one little aspect of who they are, and it may not even be true, but there's so many ways in which we're reducing people. It's all reductionist. It's real. We're trying to keep it really simple, and unfortunately, life has a lot more nuance than that. It's interesting. Just as a quick side note, you know, the sexual purity thing is often also often connected to things like modesty culture, where, you know, you can be very, very judged by whether or not you're showing any cleavage, whether or not you're ever wearing something that's sheer. I think that's fascinating. And one thing I just learned is that in the first 400 years of Christianity, Christian baptisms were very much performed fully naked. I did not know that until just today, but Christian baptisms were fully naked. It was critical. You were copying Christ. Christ was naked on the cross. And in the same way that you were identifying with Christ, you were baptized naked. I somehow don't think that that would fly today. But wanted to talk about a couple of things here. I'm going to take a quick aside. When you look at this stuff, the idea of sexual purity, and also in terms of marriage, gender roles, like sexual availability, it's really fascinating to see how that has really popped through in a lot of the big evangelical churches. And I'm going to read from some Twitter feeds by Laura Robinson, Dr. Laura Robinson. You've probably seen her on Myth Vision a few times. But at one point she was talking about this. She said in 2004, C.J. Mahaney released a book on marriage that favorably quoted Doug Wilson about the importance of women staying thin, maintaining their appearance, and being continuously sexually available for their husbands. The idea of women as necessary sex receptacles for husbands who needed to keep men satisfied had been in the water for ages, but this brought Doug Wilson's teachings to a much wider and more mainstream evangelical audience. Mahaney's Sovereign Grace Church would eventually become embroiled in an abuse scandal. In 2007, Alex and Brett Harris, again, I'm continuing to read from the Twitter feed from Dr. Laura Robinson. Alex and Brett Harris, sons of homeschooling Greg Harris and younger brothers of Joshua from the I Kiss Dating Goodbye series, they gained a national platform, these brothers did, by launching the website Revolution. And they published a book aimed at fellow teenagers, and they started to do a national speaking circuit. And their first major project was called a modesty survey. And it was a chance for men to anonymously tell women to put a sweater on. And this was, I assume, because of, she wasn't wearing enough, or it was cold and, her nipples were poking out or something. But they're saying this modesty survey was a chance for men to say, we are uncomfortable with women. And so she goes on to say, this was an exhaustive survey that sought out to discover exactly what aspects of a girl's actions, clothes, and behavior might cause men to stumble. The survey provided extensive documentation of men's fascination with girls, showing swimsuits through their clothes, putting on chapstick, using crossbody purses, and lying down. It warned about the possibility that sisters might be arousing their brothers. This website had 5 million independent viewers. In 2008, megachurch pastor Paul Worth challenged his married congregants to 30 days of continuous sex. In 2009, megachurch pastor Ed Young challenged his church to a week of continuous sex. In 2012, Young repeated this challenge. He even put a bed on the roof of his, guessing his church, not his house, but probably his church. And he and his wife live streamed themselves in this bed for 24 hours. This, they said, was to bring the bed back to church and God into the bed. As if that isn't creepy enough. Again, still reading from this article by Dr. Laura Robinson. Between 2009 and 2014, Mark Driscoll preached through Song of Solomon 4 times. These sermons were viewed nearly 300,000 times per week, more than any pastor in the world besides Joel Osteen. And this, she goes on to talk about how this was just the heyday of the sex sells evangelicalism. This is reducing people to their worth sexually, and there's that nonstop sexual availability of wives for their husbands. Again, you're objectifying people in such horrific ways. Moving past the sex part of this, collective guilt is a big one. When you just say blanket blame to everybody, you're saying there's all these categories of guilt that you have. And we see that, we see that a lot, especially we're going to get into, the issues with LGBTQ that the church has a lot, but they're often going to look at people and ignore your circumstances, your background, your behavior, and they're being deeply unfair and distressing to people because they're putting collective guilt on this. You struggle with eating too much, with obesity, you struggle with this and that, and just collective guilt. Anybody that does any of these things, you're all bad. And it's like, well, maybe, because maybe I'm not disciplined, but maybe I also have a thyroid problem. Who knows? And ironically, some of the biggest pastors I've ever seen that would preach these messages are combining these collective guilt messages when they themselves are probably very much overdue for a diet. It's hysterical to see some of the discrepancies there. Predestination. I was a Calvinist for a long time. Divine predestination is a big deal, where you're looking at all of the outcomes of time and eternity are preordained by God, and you're diminishing an individual's personal choice and their validity, their free will, as it were, if that were a thing. You're telling people you're powerless ultimately, and you have to kind of resign to whatever God chose. Your desires, your will, your decisions, your preferences, they're all irrelevant. You're objectified. You're reduced to you're a mere actor in a predetermined plan, and your personal agency is gone. Your decision-making power is gone. God made the decision for you. You have been reduced. The idea of suffering and self-sacrifice and even martyrdom, seeing that as a good thing, as maybe virtuous is a good word for that. It's glorified. You're seen as like, if you can endure pain for the cross, endure persecution for Christ, for your faith, it's a noble and worthy cause. It's a good thing to suffer for Jesus. And it can be objectifying to people because you're valuing their suffering over their actual experience of pain. And instead of trying to alleviate it, you're saying that I'm reducing you to this idea that if you can suffer, God is pleased. And of course, we saw that exponentially with Mother Teresa, and Hitchens exposed that wonderfully over and over. But the idea of like, this is virtuous if you can suffer for God, and instead of trying to alleviate your suffering, we're going to see you simply as a chance for God to give you this path of spiritual growth by depriving you of good things, even simple health. It's a very misguided worldview. It's a misguided notion. It's the idea, like if someone would say, you should seek your own happiness, you should seek freedom from this pain and relief. It was almost like, well, what are you, selfish? What are you, weak? God suffered for you. Why can't you suffer for him? Your suffering gets minimized. Your need for relief gets sort of taken away. And what happens instead is the spiritual narrative takes, center stage. We hear that a lot with stories of saints and martyrs. They're revered for their endurance of great suffering. And, their suffering is almost romanticized. I was also thinking about the ways that hierarchical structures, of course, in the church are going to do this. They're going to objectify people. You're going to say, I'm in charge and you're not. You're just, we're the clergy and you're the lay people. And you're going to basically, in that context, you're going to make sure that dissent is squashed and people are stifled and unempowered. It's sad because their voices and contributions are always subordinate to this authority. Your personal agency, your personal input, it's not that important. The prosperity gospel, that's an interesting one I was thinking through. When you go to a church where they're going to say your financial success is directly linked to God being happy with you, to this divine favor, anybody that's in poverty and you're suggesting your financial lack is a sign of spiritual failure, you should be ashamed. You should feel worthless. In reality, there may be just less fortunate, less lucky, as it were, but you're going to objectify people by saying your financial status is connected to your spiritual worth. And you basically need to see yourself as devalued. God has devalued you because otherwise you'd be rich. It's one thing that's sort of similar in some ways in churches is a sense of anti-intellectualism. When you see the church, the pastors specifically saying, I don't want you to go do a bunch of inquiry. I don't want you to get into debate. I don't want you to focus on critical thinking. I just kind of want you to check your brains at the door. You're objectified by having your critical thinking suppressed. Your personal growth and autonomy is reduced. It's simply, will you sign on the dotted line and say you agree with our church's stance, our doctrine? Our doctrinal statement is front and center. The end times focus can do it. When you look at people saying that God is coming here soon, he's returning, the rapture is coming soon, you don't want to be left behind. You're distracting people, pulling them from the ability and the importance of having a full and productive life right now. You can't live in the present when you think it's all about to end. And that can certainly lead people to sort of neglect things. And we've heard those horror stories where people would sell everything to tell everybody, hey, God's coming back in 3 weeks. And, people did that, Harold Camping, those kind of stories. The JWs did it several times. But like, we know God is coming back in 3 weeks or 3 months, sell everything. And you end up neglecting your earthly responsibilities, your earthly pleasures. And you're objectifying people because these people are basically saying your responsibilities in life need to be subjugated to this anticipated end of the world. And your personal achievements, your well-being, your family's well-being, even, it doesn't matter. Just focus on the, sign on the dotted line. When Christ comes back in 3 weeks, I'm with him. Beam me up to the mothership. Faith healing is an interesting one I was thinking about. Faith healing can create some objectification. People in church will sometimes talk about spiritual remedies instead of medical treatment, right? And we know those stories where they're endangering people's lives. They say blood transfusions are wrong with the JWs, and other groups will often say you don't need a counselor or medical help. This illustrates your lack of faith. The fact that you're considering going to these people means you don't believe that the gospel alone is all you need. And so your health and your well-being is subordinated to these spiritual expectations, to these guiding principles from your church, from your pastor, and they're going to harm you, of course, because you might not get the medical care you need or the counseling you need. But it's all about pulling you down to simple questions. We're going to reduce your whole life. Are you with us? Or are you against us? Are you going to sign on the dotted line or not? Spiritual warfare is a very similar one in some ways. People are having these senses that there's these conflicts. Satan and the devil are fighting the angels, and this present darkness kind of stuff. And instead of people saying, I need to look for effective solutions to my life's problems and to get healthy, instead they're simply seeing and feeling this spiritual battle. They're besieged, and your struggles, your daily struggles, are just reduced to spirituality. You're not looking in any way at the broader context of the person's life, their background, their history, their mental health, the complexity of these situations, their financial status, etc. You're trying to reduce it all to one thing. You're on the devil's side or on God's side. Similar, again, a lot of these kind of have some overlap, or they touch a little bit on the edges. Chasing miracles. When you tell people, God's got a miracle for you, God's just waiting to bless you so much. He's waiting to give you this amazing experience and turn your life upside down. And of course, when it doesn't happen, people get disillusioned and they feel like it's not my fault. Is it my fault? Is it not my fault? I don't know. But your everyday experiences become devalued because you're looking for these extraordinary experiences. You're looking for this spiritual high. And if you don't have that, if you just have, I don't know, I just go to work every day and put gas in my car, and I know you all are telling me that I need to see angels all around me fighting. I need to see God's miracles everywhere, and instead I get up and do my job and go to bed. Your everyday experience becomes devalued. And again, they're trying to shrink your life down to these little things. It's amazing. When you're in church, often we talk about confessing our sins. And so we're implying judgment. We need to judge ourselves and say our sins have upset God and have offended the church in one way or another, actively or privately, publicly or privately. But you're again becoming objectified because your personal confessions, of course, are being scrutinized and judged, and your privacy, the sense of like, well, maybe I don't want to talk about that topic. Maybe that one should be off limits. Maybe by confessing all these sins and saying, I've done all these bad things in my head and my heart and with my time, I haven't given you my time and my energy. There's a whole level of your private world that you're kind of saying, even if you're not getting detailed with the church, you're kind of saying, I'm willing to tell everybody, sort of invade my privacy and let me tell you publicly, I've just messed up on the deepest levels. And they're really reducing you to this question of, are you, again, with God or not? Another one the churches often do is to kind of alienate people that are outside of the church, that are not Christians. They're going to create these divisions in the family and in our circle of friends where we are basically saying those people should be isolated, and we need to keep the flock pure, as it were. But because of their beliefs or lack thereof, people get objectified. Again, you're in the club or you're not. And if you don't have religious beliefs, we're going to exclude you. We've talked a little bit about that in different contexts. Conversion therapy with people, how the church has often said we need to heal people from their gayness, their homosexuality needs to be reversed in some way. Attempting to change someone's sexual orientation, the psychological harm, of that is just off the charts. Of course, you're trying to get people to loathe themselves, and you're trying to fundamentally challenge and change a person's identity and their sense of worth. They're objectified because they're saying you need to be one of us. Your sexual orientation needs to be just like us, and we're targeting you for change. And you're either heterosexual or you're not. We're reducing you to this one question: you're heterosexual or you're bad. And that's all. It's just they're trying to keep reducing people. That's all this is about. There's a whole bunch of other things here. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to keep it moving. But a lot of I'm just going to hit them quick. I was thinking we talk a lot about Christian nationalism on this platform, and we'll be talking about it some more before long. But again, you're trying to marginalize the non-Christian ideas and say secularism can't be a part of America. We need to have only Christian, people in charge, and the White House, and the Senate, and the Congress, and all that. It's just, it all needs to be this. You're objectified. Your values get overridden as a secular person, and it's just one singular focus. It doesn't matter what else is in the discussion. You're either with us or you're not, and that's what they're doing. I think that's, again, the secular versus sacred dualism that we sometimes talk about. The idea of let's see here, creationism. I was even thinking about it just briefly. Creationism in education. The way that we teach our kids, whether they're homeschooled or in a school. People are objectifying people by saying, you need to agree with us, and we do not want you to think like this secular world. We don't want you to, even be exposed to evolution necessarily. We want you to, we're going to reduce you to a question: do you believe that the Earth is 6,000 years old or not? Anytime they can reduce you to something and say, we're going to reduce you down, and then we're going to basically say we're going to judge you if you're with us or against us. We're objectifying you. We're pulling you down to a yes or no. It's black or it's white. You're in our tribe or you're not. That's a big one. And a lot of people, I know for me, I felt like I, growing up, had no choice whatsoever to even investigate evolution in any serious way. I just felt like I was a bad guy if I even looked at it too closely. And I wanted to wrap this up with a quick few thoughts about the ways I've seen pastors potentially objectify people in their sermons. I've seen pastors use people as examples of sin, where you're going to literally call people out, and you're basically going to reduce them to you're just a drunkard. You're just a drunkard. You're just someone that sleeps around. A lot of times pastors will stereotype different people or groups, stereotyping the women, stereotyping the men, stereotyping the youth, certain ethnicities. There's certain traits and behaviors. That's just the way they are. I've seen that a lot. A lot of times you'll see pastors will talk about your struggles in life, and they're going to overgeneralize them. They're going to treat all the problems as the same. All the solutions as the same. They're not trying to understand your individual complexities, your personal journey, your personal story, your challenges, your strengths and weaknesses. They just want to make it real, and they're going to, of course, overgeneralize the solution, not just the struggle, but the solution. And say the solution is really easy. You just need more gospel. If you understood the depths of your sin and the gloriousness of what God did to redeem you from your sin, and how great the gospel is and how great the outcome is, then you wouldn't want to sin. You wouldn't really struggle. You'd never have a down day. They're reducing you to this simple question: Are you fully focused on the gospel or not? Of course, a lot of times you hear pastors basically treating people like projects, and we all did this as Christians. I think it argues pretty strongly. We're looking at people in the congregation. We're looking at unbelievers. There are people to be saved, or there are people to be to get more serious about the Lord. You're basically a task to be fixed. You're something on the to-do list. Let me check it off. Are you going to come up and respond to the altar call or not? Are you going to raise your hand to accept Christ or not? Are you going to give your life to Christ or not? And if you do it, you're good. If you don't, you're bad. We're all projects. Everything is a project. A lot of times pastors are going to talk about people in very transactional terms. We're going to see relationships in terms of the mission of the church and the mission of God even. We're not necessarily looking at people's individuals, like their journeys, again, their emotional needs, their personal needs, where they're at with life. This is all about, where are you in light of what God is doing? We're reducing you. Where are you in light of God's story? God's writing a story. God's writing a book. This is your chapter. Where are you in this chapter? Are you on board or not? I've seen pastors talk about people's personal traumas only for the sake of like an emotional effect, like an emotional impact. They almost seem like they're exploiting these stories of people's personal suffering so that they can have these dramatic effects in a sermon. They're not necessarily regarding and respecting people's, how that's going to impact people that are hearing these stories. They want to create an atmosphere. They want to feel like, did you get moved by the Spirit today or not? And they're using anything they can to do that. They're going to often, in a similar vein, they're going to use your pain as a teachable moment. They're going to use your struggle as sermon material. They're not going to necessarily have regard and empathy for your journey. It's just a teachable moment. They might even shame congregants, actively or passively. They're going to call out individuals or groups. They might actually call a specific person, but they're going to certainly call out groups, people that have moral failings. You're reducing people. You're just a big mistake. You had sex before marriage. You're just a big mistake. Whatever it is, anything. Oh, you went to a non-Christian college. In some places, that's almost a unpardonable sin. You didn't go to a conservative Christian college. What a mistake. Secularism all over that. A lot of times pastors will focus too much on appearance. They're going to talk about your physical attributes or your attire. And we talked a little bit about that in terms of the purity culture. But they're often going to call out, especially women, for not being modest enough. This objectification. And it's just sick. It's really sick when you look at this and you think about how so many of us in our churches just sat there and nodded and said, yes, sir. Yes, sir. I agree. They're treating people basically, in my opinion, as props. They're using stories. Sometimes even they're using your personal stories. They might change the names to protect the innocent or the guilty, but they're using personal stories as sermon illustrations. And sometimes they do it without consent. I've seen that as well. Excuse me. Pastors are often going to assume some kind of similarity or uniformity, maybe is a better word, of your experience. They're going to preach their sermons as if everybody's struggles are kind of the same. They're not looking at your diversity of your life experiences, of your gender, of your background, of your culture, family culture, political culture, whatever your subcultures. They're just going to preach and sort of homogenize it all. They're trying to objectify you, make it real simple. They're going to reduce you. Of course, a lot of it is constant binary verbiage. They're going to simply classify you as you're a sinner or you're righteous. You're saved or you're not saved. We talked about that before, but there's no complexity. There's no gray area. There's no nuance. There's no human journey. You're with us or you're against us. Of course, we're talking about the gender roles. They do that exponentially. They're often focusing a lot in their sermons on your external behaviors. They're not necessarily talking about your internal journey, your mental health. They're just talking about your actions. Are you showing up to church? Are you tithing? Are you actively sharing the gospel? Are you reading your Bible? As long as we can reduce you to a list. Have you done the to-do list? Okay. They don't necessarily want to look at the heart. Now they're going to preach about God sees the heart, God sees the intent. But in reality, a lot of times it's not that way at all. Not at all. It's the outside. Of course, they're going to often treat people in the church, all of us collectively listening, as spectators. We're passive listeners, and we're not active participants. We're seen as like, we're not worthy. We're the lay people. We need to listen to you. We're reduced to a role. They're the teacher. We are the learners. They're the Jedi, we're the Padawan. And when you treat people like that, where they're just spectators, you really are objectifying them. And of course, when you're both putting them in that spot, putting them in a spot where their opinion doesn't mean as much, and you get people living their lives in this church like that, you really do grow up thinking, I will be best served by just shutting up and listening to my pastor. He is so much more mature than me, so much more wise beyond my years. That even happens sometimes where you will have an older gentleman, maybe a gentleman who's 60 and 70, listening to a 40-year-old man preaching. But it's like we have these hierarchies that we put in church. It's amazing. Of course, I'm sure there's sort of implications, whether they're said directly or not, about whether your financial contributions to the church are significant enough. Did you tithe or didn't you? If not, then your spiritual commitment must not be that big of a deal. And all these things are adding up to a spiritual gaslighting, really. You're dismissing people, you're invalidating people's experiences and feelings, you're using all this spiritual language, but you're trying to make them feel guilty or unfaithful or not committed enough, not on fire for the Lord. And you're reducing them to, are you doing it my way or not? Is it a yes or no? Are you in the club or you're not? Churches, of course, we all hear about how they often don't address the power issues, the power dynamics, the power imbalances, whether it's between a pastor and the congregants, and especially in terms of, pastor has a woman in his office to counsel her. And, sometimes you hear these stories that come out, and there's all kinds of manipulation and objectification, power dynamics that are just ignored and sometimes very, very stealthily, pushed under the rug. I feel like a lot of times it felt like in the church that relationships were reduced to the term ministry. Like, you didn't see it as like, I'm becoming your friend. We're becoming longtime partners in what we're doing. It was just, this is an opportunity for ministry and evangelism. These aren't genuine mutual relationships. This is mentorship, and this is an opportunity to be involved in ministry. Before I go to the next couple of points here, and I'm almost done, but I was going to mention just one quick example that I thought was really, really weird. When I was in Bible college, I knew a guy who, he literally would say to me, I am looking for a wife. And, all the guys were, but he'd say, I'm looking for a wife. And, we talked sometimes about like, what are you looking for? Do you have like a list of things that are your non-negotiables? What are you looking for in a wife? And he would say, I am specifically ignoring her physical attributes. I just want a woman who's going to be good as a pastor's wife or a missionary's wife. And so he reduced his potential date and potential, courtship and fiance and eventual wife into this one bucket. Are you good for ministry or not? It really shook me to hear that. And I thought, I felt bad for her, thinking, so someday, who knows? I mean, for all I know, I'm not putting it down in the ultimate sense. For all I know, they're still married. They got 6 or 7 kids, most likely. I'm sure they're quiverful. 6 or 7 kids, and they'd probably say they're living the best life ever. So, all kinds of well wishes for their journey. Excuse me, but to me, it would hurt if I were ever to hear my spouse say to me, you know what? There was all kinds of other people around you that were more sexually appealing, that were more beautiful, more handsome, whatever. They were much more my kind of person. But I ignored that for one question: are they good for ministry? And that disqualified everybody, but you rose to the top. And of course, especially if that person ever deconverts, now it's like, oh my gosh, so you literally chose me for mythology. You chose me for how good I am in ministry to perpetuate mythology. That'll give you a bad feeling in your stomach when you find out that's all they picked you for. They didn't pick you because they were truly attracted to you. They were picking you for this ministry. A lot of times, in terms of, going back to my couple final points, in terms of thinking of what pastors do, they often will impose their personal standards from the pulpit. They'll say, I think men should always be wearing suit jackets and ties. I think women should be always wearing dresses, no pants here. I mean, no pants here for women. Whatever it is, I want you all here in church twice on Sunday. I want you here in the morning and the evening. I don't care what you all, if it's your family tradition to spend Sunday evenings together at the lake. Sunday evenings, where you're not really a solid believer and a participating member of this church. There was often a sense that the pastors were assuming everybody had a similar cultural or racial background, and that obviously can marginalize people and alienate them. But you're assuming people understand, and we're all kind of white here, right? We're all white people who grew up in suburbs, and we all kind of felt safe in our neighborhoods, and we all kind of had parents that were always bringing in more and more and more money, and we were always going to vacations, right? So we all kind of had the same experience. Like, no, there's some other people here who had some different experiences. They have different languages and different countries, different backgrounds. But I didn't feel it all the time, but I definitely felt it sometimes. And another similar one related is, of course, again, assuming that heterosexuality is the norm. And I think that for most of us in this group would probably say that most of our churches would have used that as their bread and butter. Of course, heterosexuality has to be the norm. And so they were objectifying anybody in the LGBTQ plus community by ignoring them, erasing who they are, presenting, heterosexuality is the only acceptable model. Again, I'm reducing you. Are you heterosexual or not? There was often a sense too of the sense of the norm was you were married with kids. So, an older single person who's 35 and not married yet. You've got no wife, you got no kids, you got no husband, you got no kids. Marriage and kids is the norm. So it's like, are you married? Are you having lots of sex and babies for the Lord? Are you raising up children for the Lord? Yes or no? We're reducing you to a question. Very interesting how some of that would work. There were often altar calls in a lot of the churches that I would go to, and they would manipulate people's emotions. I think we'd all agree with that happens in our churches. It's all about, are you willing to give your life to the Lord? Are you willing to donate to our cause? And people's personal discernment of like, well, I might want to give my life to the Lord, but I might not. I'll think about it. No, you can't think about it. You might die on the way home from church today. You might have a car crash and you end up in hell tonight. We need you to donate now, because if you give right now, God gave me a message. He's going to bless you, twice as hard if you just were willing to give. And we take people's personal discernment and say, please put it aside. The pastor's discernment, the church's discernment, God's discernment. You're reduced to this question of, are you going to let the pastor rule over you or not? Your experience doesn't really matter. Of course, individual spiritual journeys were always ignored. Everyone should kind of be growing towards the same spiritual goal, the same spiritual doctrine, the church doctrine, the same theology. And that's why we would say, the Apostles' Creed and so forth. A lot of superiority talk with theology. The congregation, the people are just learners who have to accept the pastor's interpretation of Scripture. There's no room for your own thought or questions. I remember a time in my church when they were basically, there was a big push for Ken Ham's stuff. So we were watching in some of the adult Sunday schools Ken Ham's videos about creationism. And one of the people in the congregation was watching this after we had like a little Q&A before the Sunday school wrapped up. And he said, I don't really think that Ken Ham is telling all the truth and all the stories. And the people in charge were kind of mocking that perspective. Like, evolution is clearly stupid, beyond stupid. And the fact that you're even raising alarm bells here and you're not just like bowing down to Ken Ham, it's like, what is your problem? Creationism is clearly superior. There's no room for your questions. There's no room for your interpretation. There's no room for dissent. Let's see here. I would just say, in wrapping this part up of what I heard pastors say, a lot of the us versus them kind of narratives. You're a believer, you're a non-believer. You're even denominationally, you're in our denomination, our interpretation, or you're not. A lot of stereotyping, a lot of overgeneralization. You're either with our agenda or you're not. And the big picture, again, is your humanity gets reduced and you end up in a spot where they're trying to reduce you. And they're trying very much to say you're an object, You are a way to get to a certain goal. And certainly people do that within all relationships. We all do this. I added in my clarification section that I don't think that we can always say that objectification is something that we can get away from, and then it's always wrong. And I think it's part of life. I think there's some ways in which we just need to admit that we're doing it. But I think if we're going to really be the best we can be, in my opinion, we need to acknowledge these dynamics and say, how are, especially some of the worst parts of it, how are we reducing people to a simple question? How are we ignoring their human journey, their gender, their sexuality, their past, their thought process, their preferences, instead of saying just let's reduce people. Let's say let's give people let's get to know people. Let's try to tell them we want to encourage your sense of identity, your sense of self-worth, your sense of figuring out who you are. We want to make sure that we're sensitive to anything that we're doing that's going to dehumanize you or degrade you or dissect you and bring you down into something to be used, to any way that we're trying to make you part of a transaction, a to-do list, an object. You are a whole person, a complex whole person. And in any relationships, church or otherwise, we need to honor that complexity. And when we do say to people, let's keep it really simple. You're with us or you're against us. You're going to consent. So you're going to fall in line to us, to what our prescription is, or you're not. That's a way where you can really reduce people, and you can really ultimately hurt them, even if they may assent to it temporarily. In the long run, a lot of people will realize, even decades later, wow, I was being used. I was part of something. And I've talked to people who've said that even about their previous spouse, where they'll say, I was being used this whole time. This whole time it was all about him. It's all about her. Everything was their way or the highway. There was no sense of who are you, spouse? Who are you, friend? Let me get to know the real you. It was just, how can you serve me? How can you fit into my grid? And if you don't fit into my grid, again, it's my way or the highway. It's really a sick way to look at life, a sick way to look at people. And I think there's some ways in which it can be part of life and not be entirely as harming as it always has to be. But in many, many cases, like the ones we've talked through today, I think it can absolutely just destroy people's self-worth. It can lead you to perfectionism in some cases. It can certainly lead people to a false sense of superiority, to say, look, I am fine with being judged and reduced. And when I got reduced to this transaction, I came up with shining colors, like I'm the trophy person. And I remember, for example, in Bible quizzing, I memorized thousands of verses, and it was such a source of pride, but it was all about this one thing. How many verses can you recount? Can you recount 3,000 or 4,000 verses off the top of your head? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Yes, I can. I know them word for word. They're in my head. Okay, so you must be a godly person then. You're a Bible quizzer. You're a Bible quiz winner. You must be spiritual. It's like, no, it's a lot bigger than that. And the injunction to hide the word of God in your heart, that may look good on the surface, but there's a whole bunch more to this. I knew a whole bunch of Bible quizzers that knew how to hide God's word in their heart, that were living like the quote unquote devil. So anyway, I went longer than I thought. So I apologize. I was trying to keep that to an hour. I thought my notes were about an hour's worth, but I went over. I'm just going to read a few quick comments and we'll wrap up. And see here. Jerwalk says, I don't like being catcalled. I wonder if those men would enjoy the systemic behaviors as well. Less pay, dismissal or opinion, violence, etc. Yeah, dismissal of opinion, for sure. Yeah, a lot of people, if they would just put themselves on the other side of the equation of being objectified, they would not like it. Absolutely. Philip says, I'm a person who ascribes to a philosophical view of balance. Therefore, extremes like feminism is not acceptable to me. As an apostate, I know what extremist thinking has done to my being. I think that's a big ball of wax. I'm not going to get into it with an answer, but I'll leave it at that. It's just a red comment. Philip again says, humans have an extremely complicated social system. Yeah, I'll agree with that one for sure. see here. Jerwalk says, as a person of color, adopted into a majority white family, I'm objectified in a different sense. People make all kinds of decisions about me, not based in reality or my experience. It's dangerous. Yeah. Agreed. Let's read a few more comments here. A lot of interesting comments, but Lord Voldemort, nice handle. I often say that the Christian worldview of the animal kingdom fails to elevate animals, as opposed to non-Christians reducing humans to animals. Yeah, I see your point there. Red Hammer says the Bible is a book of control, yet most evangelicals, like the radical right-wing Republicans, pushing Project 2025, even more government control. Oh, the irony, double standard, hypocrisy, double talk. Yeah, it is fascinating. Antoine Max says guilt is a strong tool. Yeah, agreed. Philip says, after I walked away, it is difficult for me to overlook the fact that animals are fellow sentient beings. Yeah, and a lot of people end up making some significant changes in life based on those thoughts. Jerwalk says, the sexual availability of married women is very problematic in some Abrahamic religions. Yeah, the idea that if you're not sexually available all the time, you're not just disappointing your spouse, you're disappointing God. This is part of your spiritual act of service to keep your spouse happy and satisfied and keep them distracted from the other temptations outside of your marriage. Duck Command 420, left behind is despicable. Yeah, agreed. Accidentally Agnostic says, I had such a split mind. It was drilled into me that the gospel was the most important, but it was also drilled into me that good grades were so important. Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, you're the grace of God, but no grace for your grades. Let's see here. Day the Jackal says, it is dehumanizing to a woman, saying her needs come second to her husband's. It's taking away her bodily autonomy. Yeah, agreed very much. Accidentally Agnostic again, Christian women are subconsciously spoon-fed patriarchy and are not empowered to love, know, and be in charge of our bodies. Yeah, very, very well said. Good summary. Again, she says, yes, as church leadership, we zeroed in on people who we knew had certain talents, hoping we could recruit them to our workforce. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, very much the people that had the talents were going to rise to the top very quickly. And again, that's not necessarily always in every case wrong. I see that in workplace environments too. Like if you have skills, you're going to obviously rise to the top. But in terms of a church environment, it obviously has some different ramifications. Philip Grobler, control the genitals, control the slaves. Yeah, that's what this is about. Duck Command 420, good job, Tim. You made the chat party all horny. That wasn't my goal, but hope I don't get the natives too restless. Mela66 says, Tim, thank you for sharing your thoughts on this. I'm about 4 months into my deconstruction phase and have relied so much on this YouTube channel. Thank you so much. Looking at all of this through this lens is great. I appreciate your being a part of this, and I really do wish you well with your journey. I really, really do. I hope it's more beautiful every day, every week. Let's see here. Some interesting discussions about this people, sex and marriage. Again, I'm going to leave that for the chat. I'm not going to respond to a lot of those. I think since I'm almost at an hour and a half here, I'm going to just wrap up here. But anyway, I just wanted to say a couple of final things, and we'll be done. Again, if anybody wants to jump in tonight, there's an open mic at 7 p.m. Love to have you if you're around and you're free. If you're not, if you're out having fun, have a great night doing whatever you're doing. But if you are around, we'd love to have you. And same time next week, 7 p.m. Saturday, we're going to do a deconversion poetry slam. get your poems out, start reading them so you're comfortable with what you've written, and get your cell phone out next week. Be prepared to jump in, or your laptop, or whatever. But next Saturday night, we're going to do a deconversion poetry slam. I hope we get at least like 10 or 15 people that will share your wonderful stories with us. Just jump in real quick, give us a quick heads up as to who you are, what prompted you to write the poem, and then read your poem with as much gusto and passion and power as you can. Let us get to know who you are through your poetry. So we're doing a lot of live streams. I've got 2 tomorrow, one at 9 and one at 2. The one at 9 is going to be interesting, how worldviews get shaped and changed. And the one at 2, Christians are fearmongers. So assuming that none of those get canceled, join us if you can tomorrow. And then we'll do some more later next week as well. But I appreciate you all so much. Thank you for the cool comments. Some of them very interesting. But appreciate you all so much. And thank you just for being a part of this community. But have a great afternoon, great evening. I'll see you all, some of you later tonight, some of you tomorrow.